The lights in St. Margaret's Memorial Hospital dimmed at precisely 10 p.m. each evening, but everyone who worked the night shift knew the building never truly slept. Dr. Eleanor Reed stood at the nurses' station on the 4th floor, watching as the hallway transformed into a tunnel of shadows punctuated by the soft blue glow of monitoring equipment. 20 years as a physician, and still the night shift made her skin crawl. "Just 3 more hours," she whispered to herself, checking her watch. The face read 1 a.m., the beginning of what the staff called the dead time, the stretch between 1 and 4 in the morning, when the hospital seemed to hold its breath, when the veil between the living and whatever lay beyond felt thinnest. Eleanor didn't believe in ghosts. At least, that's what she told herself each time she walked the corridors alone. Tonight was supposed to be like any other Tuesday overnight shift, quiet, routine, forgettable, but as she flipped through patient charts, the overhead speakers crackled to life. Code Blue, Room 437. Code Blue, Room 437. Eleanor's head snapped up. Room 437. That couldn't be right. Room 437 had been empty since yesterday afternoon. She grabbed her stethoscope and ran, white coat flying behind her. 2 nurses were already racing down the hallway ahead of her, pushing the crash cart. As they approached room 437, Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. The door to 437 stood partially open, darkness spilling from inside. "Who called the code?" Eleanor asked, breathless. The nurses looked at each other, confusion crossing their faces. "I thought you did, Doctor," said Nurse Jackson, a veteran of night shifts with arms strong enough to move patients twice his size. "No," Eleanor said, reaching for the door. "No, I didn't. The room was empty, just as it should have been. No patient in the bed, no equipment beeping an alarm. Just the faint scent of antiseptic and something else. Something that reminded Eleanor of the basement morgue." "System malfunction," suggested Nurse Chen, already checking the call button beside the vacant bed. Eleanor nodded, though uncertainty crawled up her spine. "Must be. Tell maintenance to check it in the morning." As they turned to leave, Eleanor caught movement in her peripheral vision, a shadow passing across the bathroom door. She turned quickly, but nothing was there. "Did you see that?" she asked. Both nurses shook their heads. "I need coffee," Eleanor muttered, trying to laugh off the uneasiness. "Let's get back to the station." But as they walked back down the hallway, the lights overhead flickered once, twice, 3 times before steadying again. "Third time this week," Nurse Jackson said. "This building's getting old." Eleanor said nothing. St. Margaret's wasn't old. It had been built 5 years ago, replacing the original hospital that had stood on this ground for nearly a century before being condemned. Back at the nurse's station, Eleanor poured herself coffee from the pot that perpetually brewed. The liquid was bitter, burnt from sitting too long on the warmer, but she needed something to steady her nerves. "Dr. Reed?" The voice behind her made her jump, sloshing hot coffee over her hand. "Mrs. Watson," Eleanor exclaimed, recognizing the elderly woman standing in the hallway. "You should be in bed." 87-year-old Martha Watson stood in her hospital gown and non-slip socks, her thin white hair wild around her face. She'd been admitted for pneumonia 3 days ago. "It's time for rounds," Mrs. Watson said, her voice oddly flat. "You're going to miss rounds." Eleanor glanced at her watch. "Rounds aren't until 7 a.m., Mrs. Watson. Let's get you back to bed." The elderly woman's eyes widened. "Not those rounds," she whispered. "The midnight rounds. They're coming. They're checking everyone tonight." Eleanor gently took the woman's arm, nodding to Nurse Chen to help. "Let's get you back to your room. You need your rest." "He doesn't like it when patients are out of bed during his rounds," Mrs. Watson continued, allowing herself to be led down the hall. "Not since what happened to him. Not since what they did." "Who, Mrs. Watson?" Eleanor asked, humoring her. Night confusion was common in elderly patients, especially in the unfamiliar environment of a hospital. Mrs. Watson leaned closer. "Dr. Blackwood, he's very particular about his rounds." A chill ran through Eleanor. "There's no Dr. Blackwood on staff here." Mrs. Watson smiled. her dentures gleaming in the dim light. Not anymore. After settling Mrs. Watson back in bed, Eleanor returned to the nurse's station, the woman's words echoing in her mind. Nurse Jackson was typing notes into the computer while Nurse Chen restocked supplies. "Jackson, how long have you worked at St. Margaret's?" Eleanor asked, leaning against the counter. "Since it opened," he replied without looking up. 5 years in August. Was there ever a Dr. Blackwood here?" Jackson's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Why do you ask?" "Something Mrs. Watson said. She mentioned him doing midnight rounds." Jackson and Nurse Chen exchanged glances. "What?" Eleanor pressed. "Do you know who she's talking about?" Jackson sighed. "There was a Dr. Blackwood at the old hospital, way before my time. But the older nurses talked about him. What happened to him? The story goes that he was conducting some kind of unauthorized research on terminal patients, after-hours experiments. When the hospital board found out, they revoked his privileges. The next night, he came back to collect his research and somehow started a fire. He died in it, along with 5 patients who couldn't be evacuated in time." Eleanor felt her mouth go dry. "And this happened in the old hospital? The one that stood here before?" Jackson nodded. "4th floor, east wing, right where we're standing." The overhead speakers crackled again, making all 3 of them jump. "Code blue, room 412. Code blue, room 412. "That's Mrs. Watson's room," Nurse Chen said, already moving. They raced down the hallway, the squeaking wheels of the crash cart cutting through the silence. When they reached room 412, Eleanor pushed the door open to find Mrs. Watson lying peacefully in bed, her eyes closed, chest rising and falling with deep, even breaths. No emergency, no coding patient. "Another malfunction?" Nurse Chen suggested, but her voice trembled slightly. Eleanor approached the bed and checked Mrs. Watson's vitals. Normal. The elderly woman didn't even stir. 2 false codes in one night? Eleanor shook her head. "Someone needs to check that system." As they left the room, the hallway lights flickered again, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Eleanor pulled her white coat tighter around herself. "I'm going to check the other patients," she said, "just to be safe." For the next half hour, Eleanor made her way through the 4th floor, checking on each sleeping patient. All were stable, all resting comfortably, nothing out of the ordinary. Until she reached room 422. Thomas Freeman, a 52-year-old recovering from bypass surgery, was sitting straight up in bed, staring at the door when Eleanor entered. "Mr. Freeman? Everything all right?" she asked. "He was here," Freeman said, his face pale, standing at the foot of my bed, watching me. Eleanor checked his medication chart. Nothing that should cause hallucinations. "Who was here, Mr. Freeman?" "The doctor, the one with the burnt face. He was writing something on a clipboard. When I asked what he was doing, he just smiled and said he was making his rounds." Eleanor felt the hairs on her arms rise. "When was this?" Freeman glanced at the clock. "Few minutes ago, maybe 1:45. After reassuring Freeman and checking his vitals, elevated heart rate, but otherwise normal, Eleanor stepped back into the hallway. The corridor stretched before her, empty and silent. She found herself straining to hear anything: footsteps, the rustle of clothing, the scratch of pen on paper. Nothing. She returned to the nurse's station, where Jackson was hanging up the phone. "Everything okay?" she asked. He shook his head. "That was security. They said the camera on this floor has been showing interference for the past hour. Just static, but all the other floors are fine." Eleanor sank into a chair. "Tell me more about Dr. Blackwood." Jackson sighed, glancing around as if making sure no one else could hear. "Like I said, it was before my time, but according to the stories, Dr. Blackwood was obsessed with documenting the exact moment of death. He believed there was something measurable that occurred when life left the body, some energy transfer or phenomenon that could be captured with the right equipment. He was experimenting on dying patients. That's what they say. He would make his rounds at night, targeting terminal patients or those he thought wouldn't make it until morning. The nurses started noticing that his patients died more frequently than expected." Eleanor thought of Mrs. Watson's words. "He's very particular about his rounds. "When did this fire happen?" she asked. "I don't know exactly. 15, maybe 20 years ago." 20 years. Around the time Eleanor was in medical school, learning that a physician's first duty was to do no harm, the lights flickered again, and this time they stayed off for several seconds before humming back to life. In those moments of darkness, Eleanor could have sworn she heard the faint sound of footsteps moving down the hallway, accompanied by the rustle of fabric, like a white coat brushing against walls. "We should check on the patients again," she said, rising. "All of them." Nurse Chen looked frightened now. "Together, yes," Eleanor decided. "We'll go together." They moved quickly from room to room, finding each patient exactly as they should be, until they reached room 430. The bed was empty, sheets thrown back. "Where's Mr. Collins?" Eleanor asked, checking the bathroom. "Empty. He couldn't have gone far," Jackson said. "He's post-op, day 2. Can barely walk to the bathroom." They split up, searching nearby rooms, the waiting area, the small kitchen used by patients and families. No sign of James Collins, a 68-year-old recovering from hip replacement surgery. Eleanor felt panic rising in her chest. Losing a patient was a serious matter, even if they had just wandered off. "There he is," Nurse Chen called from the end of the hallway. She was pointing at the elevator bank, where Collins stood in his hospital gown, one hand on his IV pole for support. Eleanor rushed toward him. "Mr. Collins, you shouldn't be out of bed." The man turned, his face slack with confusion. "I need to go downstairs," he said. "The doctor told me to meet him downstairs." "What doctor, Mr. Collins? Did Dr. Sharma come by?" "That made no sense. Dr. Sharma wouldn't be in until morning." Collins shook his head. "The night doctor. The one who does the special rounds. He said he needs to perform a procedure right away, that I won't last until morning otherwise." Eleanor felt her blood run cold. "No doctor is performing any procedures at this hour, Mr. Collins. Let's get you back to bed." As they guided Collins back to his room, the elevator doors opened with a soft ding. Eleanor glanced back, half expecting to see someone emerge. The elevator was empty, but as the doors began to close, she caught a glimpse of what looked like a dark figure standing in the corner of the car, there and then gone as the doors slid shut. After returning Collins to bed, Eleanor gathered Jackson and Chen at the nurse's station. "I want a full head count," she said. "Check every patient, every room, make sure everyone is where they're supposed to be." While the nurses set off, Eleanor went to the medication room to prepare a sedative for Collins. His vitals had been elevated, and she worried about the stress on his heart after surgery. As she drew the medication into a syringe, the lights in the small room flickered, then went out completely. Darkness engulfed her. The medication room had no windows, no emergency lighting. Eleanor stood perfectly still, the syringe in her hand, afraid to move and risk knocking over the carefully arranged medications. "Hello?" she called out. No answer. She fumbled for her phone in her pocket, but before she could retrieve it, she felt a sudden drop in temperature. The air around her became frigid, her breath visible in clouds before her face when she exhaled. And then, footsteps. Measured, unhurried footsteps approaching the medication room door. The sound of a pen scratching on paper. The door handle turned slowly. Eleanor backed against the far wall, heart hammering in her chest. The door opened, revealing a silhouette backlit by the dim emergency lights of the hallway. A tall figure in what appeared to be a long white coat. "Hello?" Eleanor called again, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure stood motionless in the doorway. Then, slowly, it raised what looked like a clipboard. "I'm conducting my rounds, doctor," a male voice said, raspy and dry like pages of an old book being turned. "I have a patient who requires immediate attention. Perhaps you'd care to observe my procedure." Before Eleanor could respond, the overhead lights sputtered back to life. The doorway was empty. Eleanor rushed out into the hallway, looking both ways. Nothing but empty corridors stretched before her. She hurried back to the nurse's station, where Jackson and Chen were returning. "Everyone's accounted for," Jackson reported, though several patients mentioned seeing a doctor they didn't recognize. "We need to call security," Eleanor decided, reaching for the phone. "Already did," Chen said. "They're doing a sweep of the building now. 4th floor, Nurse Jackson." He listened for a moment, his expression growing concerned. "Yes, doctor. Right away." The phone at the nurse's station rang, making them all jump. Jackson answered it. "4th floor, Nurse Jackson." He listened for a moment, his expression growing concerned. "Yes, doctor. Right away." He hung up and turned to Eleanor. "That was Dr. Williams down in the ER. They just admitted a trauma patient car accident. They're sending him up here because they're at capacity. He'll be in room 437. Room 437. The empty room where the first false code had sounded. "When will he arrive?" Eleanor asked. "That's the strange part," Jackson replied. "Williams said they sent him up 10 minutes ago. He should already be here." As if on cue, the elevator at the end of the hall dinged. The doors opened to reveal an orderly pushing a hospital bed containing a young man with a bandaged head, arm in a cast, multiple abrasions visible on his face. "Sorry for the delay," the orderly called as he wheeled the patient toward them. "Got stuck between floors for a while. Elevator's acting up again." Eleanor and the nurses quickly helped settle the new patient. Ryan Taylor, 27, multiple injuries from a car accident, but stable, into room 47. As Eleanor checked his vitals, she noticed Taylor staring at something over her shoulder. "Someone else here?" he asked, words slightly slurred from pain medication. Eleanor turned. The room was empty save for them. "Just us," she assured him. Taylor's brow furrowed, but there was a doctor standing right there. Older guy, weird eyes. He was writing something down. Eleanor felt her mouth go dry. "Try to rest, Mr. Taylor. I'll be checking on you regularly." Back at the nurse's station, Eleanor found herself pacing. It was 2:30 a.m. now. The dead time was half over. "I think we should move the patients," she said suddenly. "At least the most vulnerable ones. Down to the 3rd floor." Jackson looked alarmed. "Because of some malfunctioning equipment and power fluctuations, administration would have our jobs." "It's not just that," Eleanor insisted. "You felt it too. Something's not right tonight." Before Jackson could respond, the lights throughout the entire floor dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again, settling at a dull glow that left shadows stretching across the walls. "That's it," Eleanor said. "I'm calling Dr. Hansen." As chief of medicine, Hansen had the authority to order an evacuation if necessary. She had just picked up the phone when the overhead speakers came to life once more. "Code Blue, room 437. Code Blue, room 437. The same room. The newly admitted patient. They rushed down the hallway, pushing the crash cart. As they approached room 4037, Eleanor could see the door was closed, though she was certain they had left it open. She pushed it open to find Ryan Taylor convulsing on the bed, back arched, foam at the corners of his mouth. "He's seizing," she shouted, rushing to the bedside. "Push lorazepam." As they worked to stabilize Taylor, Eleanor noticed the temperature in the room had dropped dramatically. Her hands were shaking from more than just adrenaline as she checked Taylor's airway. After 5 tense minutes, the seizure subsided. Taylor lay unconscious but stable, his vitals returning to normal. "What caused that?" Nurse Chen asked, checking the medication chart. "He wasn't given anything that should trigger seizures." Eleanor shook her head. "I don't know. Let's get neurology to see him first thing in the morning." As they prepared to leave the room, Eleanor noticed something on the cardiac monitor that made her blood freeze. For just a moment, between heartbeats, letters had formed in the peaks and valleys of the EKG reading. "My patient now." She blinked, and it was gone. Just the regular rhythm of Taylor's heart on display. "Did you see that?" she asked. Jackson and Chen looked at the monitor, then at her with concern. "See what, doctor?" Jackson asked. Eleanor shook her head. "Nothing. Just tired." But she knew what she had seen. Back at the nurse's station, Eleanor found herself staring down the long hallway of the East Wing. The sense of dread had been building all night, and now it sat heavy in her chest. "I'm going to check the old hospital records," she said suddenly. "There has to be more information about Dr. Blackwood and what really happened here." "At 3 a.m.? Jackson asked. "Records are digitized now. I can access them from here." Eleanor sat at the computer and began searching the hospital's database. It took some digging, but eventually she found what she was looking for: archived news articles about the fire at the old St. Margaret's, along with personnel records that had been scanned into the system. Dr. Victor Blackwood had indeed been a physician at the old hospital, specializing in pulmonology. According to the official record, he had been dismissed for ethical violations 3 weeks before the fire that claimed his life. The fire had started in the east wing of the 4th floor, exactly where they were now at approximately 3:15 a.m. "Look at this," Eleanor said, turning the screen so Jackson and Chen could see. The 5 patients who died in the fire, they were all terminally ill. All expected to die within days. "So?" Jackson asked. "So what if Dr. Blackwood wasn't just documenting death? What if he was somehow harvesting it?" "Harvesting death? That's not possible," Chen said, but her voice wavered. "Neither are false codes, equipment malfunctions, and patients seeing a doctor who doesn't exist, all on the anniversary of the fire." "Anniversary?" Jackson asked. Eleanor pointed to the date on the article. It was 20 years ago to the day. The overhead lights flickered again, and the computer screen went black. When it came back on, the time in the corner read 3:10 a.m. "We have 5 minutes," Eleanor said, standing up. "Until what?" Chen asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Until whatever is happening reaches its peak." The fire started at 3:15. Eleanor moved to the medication cart, pulling out several syringes. "I'm going to check on Taylor again." "I'll come with you," Jackson offered. "No. I need you both to check on every other patient. Make sure they're all stable. Don't leave anyone alone." Eleanor hurried down the hallway toward room 47, the weight of dread growing heavier with each step. The corridor seemed longer than before, the shadows deeper. The only sound was the soft squeak of her shoes on the linoleum and the pounding of her heart. When she reached Taylor's room, she hesitated before pushing open the door. Inside, the young man lay still on the bed, eyes closed, chest rising and falling steadily. The monitors showed normal vital signs. Eleanor approached cautiously, checking the IV lines, the oxygen levels. Everything appeared normal. Then Taylor's eyes snapped open, startling her. "Doctor," he said, his voice clearer than it had been earlier. "He said you'd come back." Eleanor's hand froze on the IV pump. "Who said that, Mr. Taylor?" "The other doctor. The one who was here while you were gone." Taylor's eyes were glassy, unfocused. "He said he's almost done with his rounds. Said I'm not ready yet. But some of the others are." Eleanor glanced at her watch. 3:13 a.m. "Mr. Taylor, I need you to tell me exactly what this doctor looked like." Taylor's brow furrowed. "Old, thin, white coat was wrong somehow. Burnt, maybe. And his face." He shuddered. Half of it was just not there, like it had been burned away. The temperature in the room plummeted. Eleanor could see her breath now, clouding in front of her face. The lights flickered once, twice, and then steadied at a dim glow. 3:14 a.m. "What did he say he was going to do?" Eleanor asked, keeping her voice calm despite the fear coursing through her. Taylor's eyes drifted toward the door. He said, "He needs to complete his research, that he was interrupted last time. That tonight he'll finally understand what happens in the moment between life and death." Eleanor turned to follow Taylor's gaze. The door to the room was slowly swinging closed, though no one stood there to push it. 3:15 a.m. The door clicked shut. The monitors in the room began to beep erratically, though Taylor showed no signs of distress. The television mounted to the wall turned on by itself, displaying only static. From somewhere down the hallway, Eleanor heard a scream. She rushed to the door, but the handle wouldn't turn. Locked from the outside. "Jackson, Chen," she called, pounding on the door. No response. The overhead speakers crackled to life one final time. "Attention all staff," came a raspy, dry voice that sent chills down Eleanor's spine. "Midnight rounds are now in progress. Please remain with your patients." Eleanor turned back to Taylor, who was now sitting upright in bed, staring at the corner of the room. Eleanor followed his gaze. There, in the shadows, a figure began to take shape. Tall and thin, wearing what had once been a white coat, now charred and blackened at the edges. In one hand, it held a clipboard. The other hand, skeletal, with flesh hanging in burnt strips, reached toward Taylor. "No!" Eleanor shouted, moving to stand between the figure and her patient. "You can't have him." The figure paused. From beneath a surgical cap, half a face stared at her, one eye, one cheekbone, half a mouth twisted into what might have been a smile. "Step aside, doctor," Dr. Blackwood's voice rasped. "This is my word tonight. My research must be completed." "Your research is unethical. You're violating your oath," Eleanor said, surprised at the steadiness in her voice. "Ethics?" the figure spat. "They didn't understand then, and you don't understand now. Death isn't the end. It's a transition. I'm documenting the journey. By killing your patients, by guiding them. Tonight, 5 souls will help me complete what was interrupted 20 years ago. 5 souls. The same number that had died in the fire." Eleanor's mind raced. Whatever was happening, whether supernatural or some mass hallucination, she couldn't let this continue. "You already had your 5, she said suddenly, inspiration striking. "The fire took 5 patients. Your research should be complete." The figure tilted what remained of its head. "The data was lost in the fire. I must begin again." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "You completed your research. You followed those 5 souls through the transition. You've been conducting your rounds for 20 years, Dr. Blackwood. Your research is done." The figure wavered slightly, the edges of its form blurring. "Think about it," Eleanor continued. "You died in that fire along with them. You've been moving between life and death yourself for 2 decades. You're your own final subject." The clipboard in the figure's hand began to smoke. "My research," it whispered, "is complete." Eleanor finished. "You can stop your rounds now. Doctor, your shift is over." For a long moment, the figure stood motionless. Then, slowly, it nodded. The clipboard burst into flames, the fire consuming the figure's arm, spreading rapidly until the entire apparition was engulfed. But there was no heat from the flames, only a gentle warmth that pushed back the unnatural cold of the room. "Thank you, Doctor," the voice whispered, growing fainter. "I can rest now." The flames died away, leaving no trace of the figure. The door to the room clicked, unlocking itself. The monitors returned to their normal rhythm, and the television switched off. Eleanor stood frozen for several seconds before remembering to breathe. Taylor was lying back on his pillow, eyes closed, sleeping peacefully. She checked his vitals, all normal. She checked the time, 3:20 a.m. The dead time would soon be over. The door opened, and Jackson rushed in, looking panicked. "Dr. Reed, are you okay? The doors all locked themselves. We couldn't get to any of the patients." "Is everyone all right?" Eleanor asked, her professional instincts taking over despite what she'd just experienced. "Yes," Jackson said, looking confused. "Everyone's fine. But the strangest thing, all the codes have stopped. The electrical system is back to normal. Even the elevator is working properly again." Eleanor nodded, looking at the empty corner where the figure had stood. "I think the system just needed to reset itself." For the remainder of the night, St. Margaret's Hospital was quiet. No false codes, no flickering lights, no mysterious figures. By the time the morning shift arrived at 7 a.m., the events of the night seemed distant, dreamlike. As Eleanor prepared to give her report to the day doctor, she checked on Ryan Taylor one last time. He was awake, looking remarkably better than he had the night before. "How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Taylor?" she asked, checking his pupils. "Much better, thanks," he said. "Weird dreams, though." Eleanor smiled. "That's normal with your medications." Taylor shook his head. There was a doctor. He was here, then he wasn't. And you were talking to him. He frowned, trying to remember. You told him he could rest now. Eleanor maintained her professional smile. Just a dream, Mr. Taylor. Nothing to worry about. But as she left his room, Eleanor knew it hadn't been a dream. Something had happened during the midnight rounds, something beyond medical explanation. She wasn't sure she'd ever understand it fully. As she walked toward the elevator, Eleanor glanced at the memorial plaque that had been placed in the new hospital's lobby when it opened 5 years ago. She passed it hundreds of times but had never really read it before. It commemorated the 5 patients and 1 doctor who had lost their lives in the fire that destroyed the original St. Margaret's Hospital. At the bottom, a quote was engraved: "In the journey between life and death, compassion is our most valuable instrument." Eleanor placed her hand on the plaque briefly, then continued on her way. The midnight rounds were over. All patients were resting peacefully, and somewhere perhaps, so was Dr. Blackwood. Thank you for watching today's story. If you enjoyed the midnight rounds, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more chilling tales. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any hospital experiences that gave you goosebumps. I'll be back with another story that will keep you up at night. Until then, sweet dreams, and be careful if you find yourself in a hospital after midnight. See you in the next video.